morning, everyone. Today, we will talk about changes and evolution in the field of archaeological research, how innovation and the most advanced tools can be useful to understand and make known the history and ancient art. The Egyptian Museum of Turin has been studying Egyptian archaeological finds using new methods and tools since decades, discovering new data on the habits and living conditions of ancient Egyptians. For this reason, we went to Turin and met Enrico Ferraris, curator of the Egyptian Museum. Archaeologia Invisibile, Invisible Archaeology, was born as a project to present the deepest identity of the Egyptian Museum. The museum was founded in 1824, and since then it has been the temple of research as well as of a new discipline that is Egyptology, which had just been founded thanks to the deciphering of the hieroglyphic. The Turin collection at that time counted more than 5,000 pieces, was the largest in Europe. All the scholars who were orienting themselves to rediscover the ancient civilization came here to Turin. The DNA of this temple of research remained, and we wanted to bring it back into the limelight through an important operation that took shape in 2015 with a new layout that, from that moment, with the activation of a network of research and scientific collaboration, allowed the Egyptian Museum to connect with 70 scientific institutions all over the world, 40 of which gave the possibility to create this exhibition. Archaeologia Invisibile, Invisible Archaeology, is the Egyptian Museum's manifestation of how to do research, how to know the collection, and how to build a new code to present millenary finds to the public. This code is based on science, and all the scientific institutions I was talking about before are working in the natural sciences, so chemists, physicists, biologists are working together in a network that basically covers the whole world. They range from MIT in the USA to the University of Musashino in Japan, passing of course through centers of excellence in Europe and above all Italian centers of excellence including the CNR, the INFN and the Center for the Restoration of the Venaria, which has been working with us for many years with its expertise in materials. We also include in our legacy the Vatican museums and other great museums that have collaborated in the realization of this great exhibition. We are talking about 4 years of research, 4 years in which we have activated systematic programs on animal and human mummies, on the great trousseau of the tomb of Ka, the largest private tomb in Egypt, which is now the subject of an analysis program. We talk about archaeometry, a complex of disciplines that allow us to physically and chemically study objects and therefore their materiality. This set of forces and this ability of the museum to interact with other great realities is also a sign of the times. A museum cannot do research alone. The Egyptologists cannot do research alone. Today, this is the reflection of an international way the museum is interpreting on conducting and living and presenting its own reality. The exhibition has an innovative aspect on several registers. The most evident one is the growing collaboration between humanities and natural sciences, and this inaugurates a new season that will soon become more and more present internationally. We are already seeing it in some museums and also in some of our colleagues who are taking similar steps to bring a knowledge that no longer concerns only the image we have of an object, which is cloaked in a mystery linked to a certain representation of ancient Egypt, but it's matter thanks to these tools that are made available to us by chemistry and physics, which allow us to access a new level of knowledge and materiality. And talking about materiality indeed is the material of which these objects are made of. like the type of wood, the pigments used, the chemistry of colors. All this information was preserved within the material. Materiality has passed through time. It has come down to us. It has always been before our eyes, even though we did not have the tools to enter into a dialogue with that aspect. Objects are lifeless by nature, and in order to interrogate them and to be able to have information about their biography, we need proper tools, and these are coming. It is a process that started in the 60s and 70s with the invention of portable X-rays. Radiology has entered museums, and all over the world there have been study campaigns on mummies through X-rays. However, there have been innovations with other instruments such as X-ray-F, which chemically analyzes colors without taking the pigment out, so you don't destroy the object, even if it microscopic level, but it analyzes it with a laser beam. Thus, we enter into another theme, where the character of the analysis is not invaded. We no longer need to unbend a mummy, which has been the standard method for studying mummies. I would like to remind you in this regard that Ernesto Schiaparelli, the director of the museum at that time, was as well as the discoverer of the tomb of Ka, and the protagonist of the great archaeological season of the Egyptian Museum at the beginning of the 20th century, was one of the first to decide not to unwrap mummies to study them. On the contrary, he opted to keep these bodies intact. This choice of his had a decisive impact on what we can do today, because with the invention of X-rays first and then CAT scans later, we were able to follow CAT scans at an increasingly advanced level, and then go so far as to do what is today called virtual blindfold. We have the possibility to analyze the inside of mummies, to study the physical state of mummies inside them, to discover who these people were, how they were physically in the last years of their lives. This is also possible through the presence of jewelry. We can discover the way they were embalmed and have a series of information without touching the mummy. This is a further step because it gives us the possibility to give future generation of curators and scholars an intact collection that will be able to answer new questions that new technologies will be able to address in the future. The innovative aspect of the exhibition lies precisely in the formalization that the Egyptian Museum gives to the importance of the materiality of the objects, and therefore the importance of physically preserving these objects. Because quite often the idea of a museum is that of a container, while in reality we are giving a physical meaning to this importance because we present these objects as if they were a database with precious information still to be discovered. The museum becomes more than a simple big container because it is able to study and query these databases. The language is that of a science, so if we talk about science, we take away a category of purely subjective fascination and mystery and discover the gestures of the craftsman who made the box, the methods of embalming through codes within everyone's reach. This is a decisive step to reduce the distance between the academy and the public. One of the aspects of the exhibition that best reflects the museum's ability to reduce the distance between such an ancient past and our present is the study of colors. A video in particular, made in collaboration with the MIT, allows us to study the physical properties of a specific color, the Egyptian blue. It is the first synthetic color invented by our civilization. It dates back to about 4000 before Christ and is the first synthetic product because there is no material in nature which, if crumbled, allows the pigment of Egyptian blue to exist. It was the result of firing at 900 degrees of a mixture of calcium and copper and silica that led to this intense blue that was used to replace the more precious lapislazuli. This point of the exhibition is important because the MIT department that collaborated with us deals with material science, and in the department run by the chemist Admir Mazic, they study ancient materials not only in an historical perspective, instead to recover a technological background that we are not using for the development of new materials. In short, they study, for example, Roman cement to capture particular chemical physical aspects that could be applicable to the development of new materials used in our contemporary world. The Egyptian blue, for example, has a chemical physical peculiarity that is to reflect in a band of the infrared electromagnetic spectrum. What does this mean? It means that if you use an infrared machine with a particular frequency, even just framing an object with that blue used to decorate, the object shines as if it were an X-ray. It is important for a restorer because it allows him to make a non-invasive investigation. Let's imagine other applications. For example, thanks to this peculiarity, Egyptian blue is a test material that seems to be much more efficient than normal materials used to take fingerprints. Probably because of the presence of copper, Egyptian blue is biostatic. It means that it is not attackable by infections, and therefore they are doing experiments in bone prostheses that present Egyptian blue to the whole, and again for chemical physical reasons it seems that its use to increase the efficiency of solar panels is very interesting. It is therefore understandable that talking about topics such as technology, science, materiality within an exhibition finally shows that studying the ancient world can have an important reflection also on our present at a material level, thanks to the human experience accumulated over the centuries and which unfortunately has been lost for various historical reasons. The study of these materials through archaeometry allows us to have important inputs for the development of our present. In this sense, Egyptian blue is an interesting material, not only because it was the first result of experimentation that led to the creation of this color, but also because of the possibility we have today to understand how best to develop products and materials in our present. The exhibition has a path that can be summed up in a slogan: it is a real journey to the invisible and back. It is divided into 3 sections in which we show the various moments of the exploration of the biography of an object. Starting from the place where it was found, the Archaeological Excavation, which is a visible world in which we collect information through photography in particular. This happened mainly between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, although we still use photography today, which has evolved. In this regard, we have a very nice video in which we tell the evolution of photography that becomes photogrammetry, that is to say, an imaging on 360 degrees of an object converted into a digital model, which allows us to have a very high resolution model that we can shoot and observe, enlarge and look at, even when the mission is closed and we are back at the museum. In this sense, I open an important parenthesis. The Egyptian Museum, as a research institution, has now activated a series of excavations in Egypt after a long absence, thanks to a collaboration with the museum and the University of Leiden, which has an historical concession on the Saqqara site, and the exhibition will tell the results of this campaign through the use of photogrammetry that allows us to make digital models of both objects and entire sites. It also allows us to study the levels of a site that are necessarily destroyed during the archaeological process because we study one level down to the next. So we recognize the importance of a tool that today allows us to stop the situation of a level with its objects and all the information we have, and to be able to reconstruct it digitally, really allowing us to return to the site in order to observe these peculiarities. It allows us to share these digital sites with colleagues who can have access to this research that would otherwise remain accessible only to those who participated in the excavation. The visible world gives us a series of information about the object, where it was found, together with which other objects, all within an invisible network that links the different objects found on a site. It is in this regard that in this section we talk about the first life of the object, that is, from the moment it was produced, used, and then abandoned. This first life ends metaphorically at the moment of abandonment of this object, to be then rediscovered during the excavation, where two moments overlap, the first and the second life of an object. The second life is the moment in which the object is found, and from that moment in our culture assumes a new meaning. It becomes an archaeological find. Therefore, from an object of common use, first life, it becomes an archaeological find, witness of a civilization and history, acquiring a value not only functional, but above all, cultural. In this new configuration, the object undergoes a series of transformations. It is removed from its site, from its archaeological context, brought as it once was in the museum of reference that had managed the mission, and is contextualized again. This means that the object, removed from its original place, is repositioned in a space in communication with other objects in order to convey a message that the museum authorizes or suggests to the public, and that can change over time according to the interest that a society may have. Let us remember that a museum is an expression of the society of reference, and at this point a new life begins for the object that will be restored and entrusted to future generations. These two moments overlap during the archaeological excavation, and it is the eye that gives information to reconstruct the biography of these objects. The second section is that of analysis, which is configured as the heart of the exhibition, in which we narrate the technologies implemented to analyze the materials, going to see what human man could not. We therefore use multispectral analysis techniques. Therefore, they are non-invasive analysis which, through various bands of the electromagnetic spectrum, allow us to observe different aspects, all compacted around an object. Or another method is the infrared, which allows us to see that under a pictorial film there are other drawings, perhaps as an afterthought of the painter. Again, X-rays allow us to analyze how the wooden structure of a cassette, for example, has been assembled. And again, ultraviolet allows us to look at the chemical alteration of a pictorial film. And then we come to a very interesting tool called macro XRF, which is a scanner that allows us to map the chemical elements present on an entire pictorial surface. And from these we have been able to learn a very important news about a drawer that came from Case Trousseau, in which it was seen that the craftsman used two types of black color, a common one, which is the smoke black, and then a black composed of manganese, which he decided to use only for details such as hieroglyphics, fine lines, dots. We must therefore understand the reason for this choice, because all the details could be painted even with the smoke black color. During the preparation of the exhibition, in which we prepare some drafts of the various colors of a typical Egyptian craftsman's palette, we included manganese black, and the restorer Paola Buscaglia realized a singular aspect. Preparing the smoke black, the most common one, requires a lot of preparation time to mix the pigments with the binder. We're talking about at least 12 hours to have a smoke black color that had to be used immediately, because if you let it rest, the two elements would have separated. In addition, to obtain a smoke black that could be applied at different times, the processing time was about 36 hours to mix this color. On the contrary, manganese black is almost instantaneous. Therefore, that the craftsman used a manganese black because it was faster to prepare is a plausible hypothesis. However, the doubt remains: why didn't the other craftsmen use it? Perhaps we are faced with a different knowledge that craftsmen had of the materials, just as in our 19th century, painters still produced the colors they used, and obviously, depending on the skill they had a palette of colors commensurate with their knowledge. So, this world of the invisible allows us to look at the object and go further, to look also at the man who was behind that object and who made it, discovering pages of microhistory that otherwise would have been completely invisible and undetectable. The world of analysis then proceeds as far as X-rays, thus entering the radiological study of mummies, and we tell the story of Europe's controversial relationship with mummies. In the 15th century, for example, mummies were used in the pharmacopoeia, still present until the beginning of the 20th century in pharmaceutical catalogues, which consisted of mummy powder to make preparations. And from here we have the virtual unwrapping of Ka and Merith, who are the two spouses who, as well as the owners of this marvelous tomb, were discovered by Schiaparelli in 1906. And in which we explain on a scale of 1 to 1 how we can substantiate what we have established about mummies, such as, for instance, their age. From here we move towards the third part, the return to the visible. This is the moment when we use this information to do restoration, to carry out conservation work, to integrate, where possible, a possibly damaged document, to preserve it, or to give the public a greater and integral vision of a fragmentary object. It is also used to reassemble objects that had separated during an excavation. So in this sense, we return to the visible thanks to the use of these data to give the public a better understanding of them. The virtual unwrapping of mummies has an ethical aspect. The destruction of mummies did not only interfere with the stripping of archaeological information, it also affected the preservation of a practice, of a cult, of a civilization that obviously no longer exists, but is no less important than living societies. For this reason, the Egyptian Museum, following the development of non-invasive technologies, introduced an ethical development that is part of the principle of proper exposition in Egyptian museums. Around the 90s, indeed, the International Council of Museums, the ICOM, started a common reflection among museums on the opportunity not to represent mummies in showcases as if they were objects. This gave rise to a new sensibility that suggested that museums should only present mummies when there was a specific educational need. The Egyptian Museum has accepted and adhered to this vision, so the museum offers only a few mummies on the view, only for specific reasons. For example, we have natural mummies that had been dehydrated naturally before the invention of the most common embalming processes. Or we have another mummy on display because it has an abnormal bandage compared to tradition, and so on. This practice is associated with the use of visual bandages, which carry forward an idea of mummy preservation not only on a material but also on an ethical level. The exhibition Even Statues Die, Anche le statue muoiono, spoke of objects taken from their context and therefore from their first life. In reality, the museum does not contradict the principle of the exhibition Invisible Archaeology, Archeologia Invisibile, which is a reflection on the individual nature of objects, on their biography, that continues over the time. In the exhibition Even Statues Die, one aspect of the life of an object was highlighted, while in the exhibition Invisible Archaeology, this reflection on objects is continued, explaining that if they were taken out of their archaeological context, they lose their link with their origins. However, these objects have traversed time, some even entire millennia, and in many cases have continued to record relationships and information through restoration or reuse of a given object. Precisely for this reason, in Invisible Archaeology, we welcome the spectators in an unexpected way, for example, in this oval room where we present contemporary objects belonging to the members of the foundation, which are characterized by having passed from hand to hand within a family or by having changed over the time, such as this violet behind me dated 18th century. It was physically changed in the 18th century to make it more powerful as a result of the change in romantic taste, and in this way the nature of the objects where we are accustomed to look at as simple products is told. Indeed, our society has developed the idea that the object should not last, so that it can be replaced. Here instead we are faced with objects that are designed to last as long as possible and have therefore developed their own biography. Invisible Archaeology continues the reflection on the nature and identity of objects as the materialization of memory, of the passage of the human being. Objects resist in time where we cannot. This is why we are organizing an international symposium just before the closing of the exhibition, in which we will not only talk about Egyptian objects, but we will still investigate the nature of objects through the eyes of various disciplines such as anthropology, archaeometry, archaeology, investigating the birth of new objects, starting from the ancient ones. The mass of information collected on this data allows us to build digital doubles of objects that become a new digital object that accompanies the oldest one, allowing us to become a digital interpreter of the object that alone would not be able to be narrated. We are at the end of this episode of Business Art, dedicated to art and new technologies and the way they influence today the approach to the ancient world. Thank you for being with us. I invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Continue to follow us and I'll give you an appointment to the next episode of Business Art.